My name is Marina Ellis, and I am 34 years old, a woman who once believed that if she built a life with care, precision, and love, it would stand as solidly as the foundations she drew into her blueprints, never imagining that betrayal could seep into the walls like water through cracked cement. That night, I woke not from a nightmare, but from a silence too complete, a stillness that didn't feel like sleep, but like something watching, waiting. The sheets were cold beside me. Julian was gone. At first, I told myself the harmless version of events. Maybe he was in the kitchen getting water, or downstairs checking on that damned espresso machine he was obsessed with calibrating perfectly. But the moment I turned toward his empty side of the bed, a weight pressed against my chest like a warning I couldn't name yet. Then I heard it, a voice, low, steady, controlled, threading through the stillness like a needle pulling something tight. It was Julian's. He was on the phone, not far, probably in his office, which he always kept dimly lit at night with that antique desk lamp from Florence, the one I had given him on our 5th anniversary. And that thought, that detail, made something twist deep inside me, because his voice wasn't laced with warmth or humor or anything familiar. No, it was clipped, calculating, a tone I'd never heard before. "She doesn't suspect a thing," he said, each word sharp enough to draw blood if touched. I froze, sitting upright without meaning to, because the way he said she, as if I were not his wife but a variable, a liability, triggered something primal, something no amount of logic or architectural theory could soothe. There was a pause, followed by a second voice, masculine, muffled but assertive, and then Julian again, even colder this time. "By next week, it'll all be in my name. Accounts, investments, the portfolio. We just need to be subtle." And in that moment, standing in the shadows of the hallway, bathed only in the spill of soft amber light from his office door, I realized that my life, as I knew it, was no longer intact. It had already begun collapsing from within, and I was only now hearing the first groan of the structure breaking. I wanted to storm into that room and demand answers, wanted to scream his name until the walls trembled the way my hands were trembling, but something instinctual told me to wait, to listen, to understand before I revealed that I knew. So I stood there, not blinking, barely breathing, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears, until I heard the scraping of a chair, the shuffle of feet, and the unmistakable sound of a call ending. And in an instant, I turned, nearly tripping over myself, racing back down the hallway with silent urgency, slipping beneath the covers as if nothing had happened, my heart pounding like a drum against a hollow floor. The door creaked open slowly. Julian walked in, unhurried, casual, like a man who had just wrapped up a harmless work call instead of planning a financial ambush against the woman he once vowed to protect. He slid into bed beside me, his breathing soft and even, his presence warm but suddenly unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing the skin of someone I used to love. And as I lay there with my eyes shut tight, pretending to sleep, I understood something terrifying in its simplicity. Julian wasn't just keeping secrets. He was preparing to erase me, and I had just heard the first draft of his plan. The next morning arrived not with sunlight and serenity, but with a hollow tightness in my chest, the kind that creeps in slowly when your body knows something you haven't yet admitted to your mind. Julian stood in the kitchen, humming to himself as he pressed espresso into the chrome portafilter, the way he always did, ritualistic, mechanical, deliberate, as if the routine could wash away whatever shadows had crawled through the walls overnight. I walked in, barefoot and silent, watching him for a moment, my arms wrapped around myself, not from cold, but from the realization that I no longer knew the man in front of me. Not truly. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile you offer a stranger you pass in a hotel hallway. Polite, forgettable, hollow. "Morning," he said, sliding a steaming cup toward me like a peace offering from a country I no longer recognized. I mumbled something in return, but my mind was already elsewhere, calculating, dissecting, preparing. As he stepped away to check his phone, always face down, always locked, I took mine out from under the sleeve of my robe, opened our shared investment dashboard, and braced myself. And there it was. Like tiny, silent earthquakes that go unnoticed until the building collapses, I saw them. Dozens of withdrawals over the past 3 months. Some just a few $100s, others more. All traced back to Julian, routed through obscure brokerage channels, and disguised as market adjustment fees or private consulting disbursements. Nothing large enough on its own to trigger alarm. But together, a pattern. A blueprint. A slow bleed of trust and resources, executed with the same precision he once used to draft business plans and scale his early startups. My fingers gripped the edge of the marble island, knuckles pale against the stone, heart pounding as if trying to escape the realization taking shape in my chest, that this man, my husband, had been siphoning our life piece by piece, confident I'd never notice, because in his mind, I'd never look. "You're checking the portfolio?" Julian's voice cut through the silence like the edge of a chisel striking glass, smooth on the surface, but threatening to shatter everything. I turned slowly, trying not to let my face betray what I'd seen, holding the phone as casually as I could manage. "Just felt like it," I said, forcing a small shrug. "There were a few transactions I didn't recognize." He nodded, setting down his mug, walking toward me with what might have once been warmth but now felt like practiced calm, like a lawyer preparing his closing argument. "Oh, those?" he said lightly, as if we were discussing a gym membership, not our financial future. "Just some small investments I forgot to run by you. Nothing major." He kissed my temple, the gesture automatic, and turned to load the dishwasher, not bothering to wait for me to respond. And as he moved around the kitchen with choreographed ease, I realized something that made my blood turn colder than the ceramic tile beneath my feet. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't unsure. He believed I was still in the dark. He believed I was still the woman who trusted him blindly, who let him handle the money, the forms, the paperwork, because he was better at that stuff. He didn't know the version of me standing here now, the version who had heard just enough to suspect betrayal and seen just enough to know it was real. I stared at his back, his shirt perfectly pressed, his hands moving in rhythm, and I made a silent promise to myself. You don't get to steal what I built. You don't get to lie with a smile and strip my name from everything I've earned. Whatever you're planning, Julian, I'm already ahead of you, and I'm not going to let you win. That evening unfolded with an eerie calm, the kind that blankets a house right before a storm tears it open. Julian was unusually affectionate. He poured my wine without asking, laughed at my smallest remarks, even offered to cook dinner himself, something he hadn't done in months. And every gesture, every smile, every glance felt like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror for days. I played along, because now I wasn't just watching him, I was studying him. Every movement, every inflection, every time he reached for his phone with just a little too much urgency, placing its screen down like a guilty secret resting between us on the table. I waited. I waited as he took calls in the hallway, speaking too softly to hear, with a tone that didn't belong to the man I thought I knew, and with silences that stretched long enough to carry implication. And then, just as I was beginning to think tonight would end without the opening I needed, he made a mistake. Julian announced he was going to shower, and for the first time in months, he left his phone on the table, unattended, unlocked, ungrasped by the hands that normally clutched it as if it were a lifeline. I didn't hesitate. I crossed the room calmly, sat down, and picked it up with a hand that trembled only slightly. The screen lit up instantly. A message had just arrived, bold and unhidden. Dominic Levesque. The name hit me like a gust of wind through a broken window. I had heard it before, vaguely, from Julian's so-called restructuring conversations and shadowy investment meetings he said didn't concern me. He once referred to Dominic as a fixer. I had thought that meant real estate or legal strategy. Now I understood. This was no advisor. This was the man helping my husband erase me. I opened the message, heart hammering as if it were pounding against glass. Transfer the holdings tomorrow. The dummy trust is ready. Just make sure she stays in the dark. We're almost there. I blinked, reread it, once, twice, a third time. And still, the words didn't become softer, didn't change into something that made sense or offered mercy. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Those 8 words, so simple in their phrasing, landed like a blade to the center of my chest. A calculated directive from one man to another, both orchestrating my financial disappearance as if I were a hurdle to be cleared, not a woman to be respected. My breath caught. I stared at the screen, cold dread wrapping itself around my ribs like chains tightening. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the fear, something else stirred, something hotter, sharper, not panic, resolve. I took a screenshot, mailed it to myself under a disguised subject line, then placed the phone exactly where it had been, aligning the corner with the coaster like nothing had touched it at all. I returned to the kitchen with slow, measured steps, my face calm, my breathing shallow, my mind racing. From the hallway, I could hear the water still running. He was rinsing the day off his body, oblivious to the fact that the script had changed, that the character he thought would be passive and trusting was now wide awake and dangerous. He didn't know I had read the scene, didn't know that I now knew the ending he'd planned for me, but he would, very soon. Sleep did not come that night. I lay still beside Julian, my body curled under the weight of silence, but my mind moved like a machine, restless, unrelenting, slicing through memory and fear with every beat of my heart. The man sleeping inches away from me was planning to disappear with everything we had built, to leave me hollowed out and humiliated, stripped of the fortune I had spent years quietly assembling, and he believed, with such terrifying confidence, that I would never realize it until it was far too late. But he was wrong, because now I had the message, now I had the name, now I had the will. I rose just after dawn, moving through the house with practiced care, my fingertips gliding across the edges of furniture I had chosen, walls I had painted, spaces I had shaped into reflections of myself, and yet none of it felt safe anymore. Not now. Not with betrayal seeping through every corner like rot behind plaster. The moment Julian stepped into the shower, steam beginning to curl out from under the bathroom door like mist off a battlefield, I picked up my phone with hands steadier than I expected and called the only person I trusted without question. "Harper!" I whispered as soon as the line connected, my voice taut with urgency, the words coming faster than breath. "I need you." She didn't ask for details, not at first. She just said, "Where?" Half an hour later, we were sitting in her office, a space of glass, steel, and unflinching clarity, built high above the city's noise, where hard truths lived and soft hearts were armored. I told her everything. Every whisper I'd heard behind the door, every transaction I'd seen vanish from our accounts, every syllable of that message from Dominic Levesque, and with each word that left my mouth, the shape of my world as I had known it collapsed further into something colder, sharper, but infinitely clearer. Harper listened without interrupting, her eyes focused, her fingers laced together on the polished oak desk like a strategist absorbing the map before war. When I finished, there was a pause, not of disbelief, but of calculation. "You need to move your assets," she said quietly but firmly, her tone carrying the weight of someone who'd fought this kind of battle before and knew how easily the cost of waiting could become irreversible. "Not tomorrow, not later today, now." "But he'll notice," I whispered, and I hated how small the doubt sounded in my own voice. Harper leaned forward, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Marina," she said, "he's already halfway to erasing you. Do you want to keep worrying about how he'll feel about your next move, or do you want to make sure he doesn't get another chance to make one?" And in that moment, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, not completely, but it crystallized into something more useful, something with purpose, a quiet, simmering fire that burned not from vengeance, but from the instinct to protect what was mine. "Do it!" I said, my voice no longer trembling. Within the hour, we began the process. Harper's firm set up a private asset protection trust under my name, separate from all joint holdings. My apartment, which Julian had falsely assumed was marital property, was moved into a new ownership structure. Investment accounts were restructured, beneficiary designations were updated, control was transferred, legally, securely, and entirely, into my own hands. We worked like surgeons in an operating room where time was running out. Every document a suture, every signature a stitch meant to close a wound before it could bleed any further. 3 hours later, my empire, modest by Wall Street standards, but hard-earned and fully mine, was safe. Julian couldn't touch a dollar of it now. He could scheme. He could lie. He could even smile that same rehearsed smile over dinner. But the game had changed, and I had just made the first real move. The next few days unfolded with surgical stillness. Every meal, every shared hallway, every polite conversation between Julian and me stretched thin like the surface of glass, right before it shatters. He didn't know, not yet. He was still walking through our home with the air of a man in control, still offering me fresh coffee in the morning and telling me about his vague client calls, still kissing me on the cheek before leaving the house like a husband whose biggest secret was forgetting to take the trash out. But beneath that practiced exterior, I could see it. The tightening of his jaw when I reached for my phone too quickly, the faint flicker in his gaze when I asked a seemingly innocent question about our accounts, the ever-so-slight pause before he answered. He knew something had shifted. He just didn't know how much. And neither of us spoke of it. We existed like two players on a grand, silent chessboard, each waiting for the other to blink, to speak, to slip. Until one evening, just as the sun sank behind the skyline, washing the apartment in an amber haze too beautiful for what was about to happen, Julian made his move. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the space between us filled with the clink of silverware and the soft hum of the city below, when he cleared his throat and set down his fork. "Marina," he said, and the way he spoke my name, too slowly, too deliberately, told me immediately that he'd rehearsed this moment. "I've been thinking." I looked up, meeting his gaze with calm I wasn't sure I still possessed. "About?" He smiled faintly, folding his hands like he was about to propose a business merger. "I think we should consolidate some of our finances," he said, his voice smooth, practiced, measured. "Move a few assets into a joint structure just to make things easier, in case anything happens." And there it was, the velvet trap wrapped in rationality. He was offering me paperwork he'd probably already prepared, betting that I would sign without question, trusting the man I had once built a life with, the same man who now sat across from me, trying to rob me behind a curtain of calm logic. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for tension to settle between us like fog. Then I smiled. Not the smile he was expecting, not trusting, not naive, but something quieter, colder, controlled. "That sounds reasonable," I said, nodding slowly, watching the flicker of surprise cross his face. "Could you show me the documents first? I'd like to read through everything before I sign." He blinked, just once, and for a fraction of a second, the carefully constructed mask faltered. A crack in the marble, a twitch in the eye, a heartbeat too loud in the silence. But then, just as quickly, he recovered, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "I'll pull everything together tomorrow." And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The trap he thought he was setting was already wrapped around his own ankles. Because I had moved everything. I had already burned the bridge he was trying to walk me across, and now he was standing on nothing but air. That night, I stood by the window of our high-rise apartment, watching the lights of the city flicker like quiet sparks of war, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. Not broken, not afraid, but sharper, steadier, forged in the fire of betrayal. Julian thought he was playing chess, but I had already flipped the board, and the next time he reached for the queen, he'd realize it was never his to begin with. For a few days, there was silence. A dangerous kind of silence, not the calm that comes with peace, but the quiet hum of an engine revving beneath the surface, waiting to explode. Julian acted normal, too normal. He moved through the apartment with feigned nonchalance, sipping his espresso, sending emails, humming under his breath, as though our dinner conversation about consolidating assets had been nothing more than financial foreplay. But I could feel the tension radiating from him like static electricity clinging to the air. He was waiting for something. I could sense it in the way he lingered near his phone, the way his fingers twitched ever so slightly when he thought I wasn't looking, and especially in the way he avoided my eyes, as if afraid I had seen too much and was just pretending not to. I didn't press, I waited too. But unlike him, I didn't need to pretend, because I had already acted. I had already moved the board. And now, I was watching his every move like an architect observing a structure she knows is about to collapse, not with panic, but with precision. Then one morning, it happened. It began with a knock on my office door. Rachel, my assistant, stepped in, her face pale, lips pressed tightly together, holding a printed sheet of paper like it was something toxic she didn't want to touch longer than necessary. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice low, cautious, and already I knew this wasn't about work. She handed me the paper, and the moment I read the headline, my stomach dropped like stone through water. Anonymous tip: leading architect suspected of embezzling client funds amid marriage collapse. My name wasn't in the title, but in the body, in the casual paragraphs meant to mimic journalistic concern, there it was. A high-profile female architect in San Francisco, mid-30s, recently removed her assets from marital holdings while under audit. There were no sources, no evidence, just insinuations, crafted lies, sharp enough to pierce but vague enough to slither under the radar of legal action, unless you knew who wrote it. But I did. Julian. Of course it was him. I could see his fingerprints in every line. The phrasing too strategic, too carefully weaponized. This wasn't the work of an outsider. This was an inside attack made by someone who knew how to wound without drawing blood. And then, just to twist the blade, I scrolled to the bottom of the thread, where someone under a burner account had commented, "I know who it is. It's Marina Ellis." 5 words, 5 lies, 5 bullets. I felt my breath leave me, not in panic, but in fury, the kind of deep, clean rage that burns away everything soft and leaves only steel behind. Julian hadn't just tried to rob me. Now he was trying to ruin me, my reputation, my credibility. The career I had built from the ground up, late nights drafting plans by hand, flying across continents to present sustainable designs to city councils, sweating through 14-hour negotiations with zoning boards, all of it now dangling over fire because a man who once claimed to love me didn't know how to lose. I stood slowly, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, and picked up my phone. The screen blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from fury that was too sharp to contain. Then I dialed. Harper answered on the first ring. "He went public," I said, the words clipped, deliberate. "He's trying to smear me." There was a pause. Then her voice, calm as ever but laced with venom. "I hope he's ready for what comes next." That afternoon, we issued a cease and desist to the platform hosting the article and to every contact we suspected Julian had used to plant the story. Harper crafted the letter like a blade, elegant, precise, and capable of drawing blood without leaving a fingerprint. In it, we demanded a full takedown of the defamatory content, a public retraction, and issued formal notice that any further publication would result in immediate litigation for defamation, reputational damage, and emotional harm. But even as I signed the documents, even as I saw the first post quietly vanish from the internet hours later, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Julian wasn't finished. Men like him, men who build their self-worth on dominance and deception, never go down after one punch. They lash out harder when they're cornered. And I could already feel the air shift. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. 3 days later, the silence broke. Not with words or warnings, but with the arrival of a thick envelope on the doormat of my apartment, stamped with the crimson seal of the Superior Court of California. My name typed cleanly across the front, like a threat disguised as formality. It was Julian. He had filed a lawsuit. Inside were over 40 pages of accusations, each more venomous than the last, all carefully constructed, with fabricated evidence designed to do one thing: bury me. He wasn't just accusing me of hiding assets. He was accusing me of fraud, of embezzling funds from our joint accounts, of financial abuse, and, the most audacious of all, demanding not only half of everything I owned, but also monthly support payments to compensate for lost career opportunities he suffered during our marriage. I read those words, slowly, twice, trying to comprehend the scale of his arrogance. Julian had never sacrificed anything. He didn't give up his career for our marriage. He hadn't supported me while I worked double shifts to get my license. He wasn't even present for most of the milestones in my career. The keynote in Copenhagen, the award ceremony in New York, the green infrastructure proposal in Seoul. He'd missed all of them, too busy chasing next big ideas that never materialized. And now he wanted half of what he'd once called my silly design money? I sat down, the weight of the document heavy in my lap, not because I feared losing, but because I knew exactly how dangerous a lie could be when presented under oath. I called Harper. She didn't ask how I was. She knew. Instead, her voice came through like steel wrapped in silk. "Let me guess," she said. "He's accusing you of fraud?" "And demanding support," I replied, scanning the absurd requests in the final pages. "He's also claiming I transferred everything after he filed Nisyan that day, not before." Harper exhaled sharply. "Of course he is. He's trying to make you look like the one hiding things. Typical reverse strategy. But that also means he's relying on falsified dates to make the narrative fit." I stood, my pulse steady now, no longer laced with fear, but with the focused rhythm of someone preparing to strike. "Can we prove the timeline?" "Not only can we prove it," Harper said, and I heard the shift in her voice, the fire she kept carefully banked unless provoked. "We're going to turn it against him." We moved quickly. Within 24 hours, Harper brought in a forensic financial analyst, a former SEC investigator known for dismantling corporate fraud rings with nothing more than bank logs and a spreadsheet. We gave him access to every document I had, the trust formation, the transfer receipts, the timestamps from our banking portals. He worked in silence for a week, his office lit long into the night, glowing like a forge. And then, one crisp Thursday afternoon, he called us in with a quiet smile and a file thicker than Julian's lies. "They made a mistake," he said, sliding the folder across the table to Harper with the kind of calm that signals absolute certainty. "What kind of mistake?" I asked, not breathing. He flipped to a page, tapping it gently. "The transactions Julian claims you made, the ones he says you used to hide assets from him, they're dated 2 weeks before your account even existed. The account number didn't go active until July 12th. Their documents show transfers on June 28th. I blinked. Then I smiled, slow, cold, triumphant. They'd fabricated the timeline. Idea. And fumbled the dates. Their ambition had made them sloppy. Harper closed the folder with deliberate precision, her expression unreadable except for the fire flickering in her eyes. "We're not just defending against this," she said. "We're going to dismantle it. Every lie, every forged document, every twisted claim." That evening, we filed our counterclaim, Marina Ellis versus Julian Ellis and Dominic Levesque, on charges of defamation, submission of falsified evidence, intentional infliction of reputational harm, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. For the first time since this war began, I didn't just feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was winning. Julian hadn't expected me to fight. He hadn't expected me to think or prepare or strike back harder. And now? He wasn't the one holding the narrative. I was. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Sterile. Impersonal. A place where truth was supposed to matter, but too often drowned beneath performance and manipulation. But not today. Today, truth had come armed. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Harper, my posture straight, my breath steady, my heart no longer racing with fear, but beating with the quiet rhythm of certainty. Across from me, Julian fidgeted with the cuffs of his shirt, designer, pressed, and chosen to convey the image of a stable, rational man who just wanted fairness. But his hands betrayed him. They trembled, his jaw clenched. And beneath the smooth, artificial charm he wore like a mask, I saw it. The cracks. The unraveling had begun. The judge flipped through the files, ours and theirs, pages rustling like the prelude to an execution. And when he spoke, his voice was level but absolute. Based on submitted evidence and supported by forensic analysis, the court finds that the documentation provided by the defendant, Mr. Julian Ellis, contains material inconsistencies and fabricated financial records. There was a sharp intake of breath from Julian's counsel. But the judge continued, unfazed, his tone a hammer cloaked in calm. Specifically, the alleged transactions predate the existence of the accounts in question. Therefore, the court concludes that these documents were manufactured with the intent to mislead. I felt Harper's hand close gently around mine under the table. A quiet squeeze of recognition, of victory, of knowing we had just crossed the line between defense and justice. The judge turned toward our side. All claims filed by Mr. Ellis are hereby dismissed with prejudice, he said, and legal costs incurred by Ms. Ellis are to be covered in full by the defendant. Furthermore, and here he paused, leveling a gaze at Julia so sharp it might as well have been a verdict. Due to the submission of knowingly falsified documents, a motion has been filed with the district attorney's office to open a criminal investigation into Mr. Ellis and Mr. Levesque. Across the room, Julian's face dropped, the color draining, the mask finally slipping, revealing not a master manipulator or a confident strategist, but a man stripped bare by his own arrogance. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply sat there, composed, still, unmoved. As the gavel came down, court adjourned. Outside, cameras flashed, not in frenzy but in passing curiosity, and Harper guided me through the crowd with the ease of someone who had walked dozens of high-profile clients through chaos. But this wasn't chaos. It was clarity. That night, as the city glowed beneath my penthouse balcony, I poured myself a glass of wine, not to celebrate wealth or victory, but to mark something quieter, something far more sacred, freedom. For the first time in months, I could hear myself think without interruption, could exhale without fear, could sleep without wondering what move he would make next. Julian had lost everything he tried to take from me, the assets, the control, the public image he clung to like a crutch. He was dropped by his consulting firm within days, his professional license flagged for investigation, and the car he used to brag about, that black German machine he polished every Saturday, quietly disappeared from our building garage, sold off to cover legal fees he could no longer afford. His name became a whisper in the background of my world, not a threat, not a shadow, just noise. And mine? It remained intact, untouched, whole. Later, Harper and a few close friends insisted we celebrate, and for once, I didn't resist. We gathered at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the bay, the wind cool against my skin, the air scented with citrus and relief. As we raised glasses under string lights and stars, Harper turned to me, her voice soft but clear. "To Marina," she said, who reminded all of us what it looks like when a woman stops being underestimated. The glasses clinked. I smiled. Not the smile I had worn for Julian, not polite, not protective, but real, strong, liberated. And as I walked home later that night, heels clicking gently against the cobblestones, coat wrapped around me like a shield I no longer needed, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. I knew who it was, even before I looked. Unknown number. I opened the message. "This isn't over." I stared at it for a long moment. Then, without ceremony, I tapped block. The act was so simple, so final, it almost felt like an afterthought. Because it was over, for him, for me, something new was beginning. Not a rebuilding, not a return, but a reclamation of space, of silence, of power, of self. And as I stood alone in the glow of my city, the same city that had once watched me break, I understood what Julian never could. The greatest revenge was never about destruction, it was about survival. And the one woman who survives, quietly, intelligently, and completely, is the one no one ever sees coming.